Hello, everybody, and it's great to be here, and it's great to see such a packed hall this early in the morning, well, relatively early in the morning. Uh, and I think this is a particularly exciting and interesting subject to look at because change is something that I think we are seeing, and the pace of change, according to many people, is only going to accelerate in the years ahead. So there are challenges, and there have been a lot of challenges in the last couple of years, more so than ever before. There's been the change related to the pandemic. There's been, challenges concerning supply chains, a war in Ukraine. And then there's this entire specter of the technological changes that are happening. Industry is getting disrupted. Everything which you once believed is going to be true, now you start questioning. Is it going to remain true? Is there a new challenger that is coming? Is technology a friend or an enemy? So those are some of the questions that industry is been dealing with. How do you navigate this? What is the compass that you need? What is the roadmap that you need to keep in mind? And how do you plan for it? Now, I think the panel that we have out here is one of the most outstanding panels to be able to answer many of these questions. So I'll just thank all of you for joining us in a quick, you've already been introduced, so none of you really need an introduction. But very quickly, Rajive Kaul, the chairman of Nicco Engineering Services. Thanks so much for being with us. Pati Singhania, vice chairman and managing director, JK Papers Limited. Of course, CK Ranganathan, who's the president of AIMA, so it's great to have you with us, and maybe we'll start with the opening comments from you. Harshavardhan Neotia, chairman of Ambuja Neotia Holdings Private Limited. Thank you all so much for being with us. So Balaji is going to say something at the very end of the process. But Mr. Ranganathan, why don't I start with you? You are, in addition to, everything else that you do at CavinKare, as chairman, as head of AIMA, when you're looking at this world, are you seeing more challenges or more opportunities with all the flux that is happening?
Thank you, Vikram. Good morning, all. So I see this is a very challenging time, but at the same time, it opens up quite a lot of opportunities. I think I would say that challenges are no lesser, but opportunities are much more than the challenges, is how I see. And I would say we are all seeing the fourth revolution that's happening, the technology, which used to be an enabler. I think now it is very, very clearly understood across the world. Technology is no more an enabler, but it's a very important strategic tool. And that, I think, is where it's going to take us or make us kind of the thing. It's very important that we play it well. I see one more thing, if you allow me to. So one of the important thing, if you look at that, is the world is changing. And it's always the CEO's very important thing as in terms of where do you invest? Where do you stop investing? Because we are quite a lot of times, we have the data in front of us, all the CEOs if you look at, but still emotionally betting behind some of the areas. I think that needs to be stopped. The data are far more sharper and accurate. And there are predictive intelligence that have come in the form of AI. AI is a very, very important thing. That you know that whether it's going to give the bang for the buck. I think that's also a very important thing. The analytics, which used to be the kind of in thing in the last 1 decade, now it's artificial intelligence laced analytics that's playing havoc in the kind of this thing. And this will differentiate which companies will stay on and which companies will go away. Therefore, it keeps me awake in terms of how we embrace technology, how we kind of this thing becoming more and more tech savvy. I think this is a very, very important thing. And the technology is fast changing. Half the time we keep educating our own people to upgrade and be ready for the future challenges. So that's what I would say. I will stop here and come wait for my next round.
I think there's one aspect of that which I would like to ask you about, that at what point do you disregard the data and go with gut feeling and instinct, right? Because sometimes you may have to do that if you really want to be disruptive. But you're right, I'll come back to you for that. If I can just ask you, Mr. Neotia, your opening remarks of how you see the overall environment, and then we'll get into sub-themes.
Good morning to everyone. Well, while I fully agree that technology is going to be one of the big disruptors and therefore a great opportunity too, I would just like to take one different point of view, and this is regarding how we have seen that COVID has caused a huge, should I call a fault line between those of us who are more privileged and those who are not so privileged. And we have seen that there is a bunching of demand and opportunity for those who are privileged, and there has also been a lack of that to those who are not so privileged. And this divide is growing and has grown quite significantly. What therefore this will result in the immediate future, and therefore how do we really combat this problem? Will it lead to social tensions? Will it lead to governments being focused on greater welfareism because of this nature of this divide, and therefore how does it impact inflation and a host of other governance related issues are something that we all need to think about, because I don't think we can increasingly live in a very, very polarized kind of a economic environment where some continue to benefit greatly and some continue to actually get further deprived from where they were. So I think this is an important challenge that this situation has thrown up, and we all need to put our heads, not such an easy answer, frankly, and not such an easy to comprehend the challenge also, but I do think this is a challenge that will come to us.
All right, the question of inequalities, I think it's particularly important because, again, with technology, it's possible, not just because of the challenges of the pandemic, but with technology, we're already seeing around the world, power gets concentrated, economic wealth gets concentrated, benefits get concentrated, what happens to everyone else? I think that's a very valid point to look at. Singhania, you want to go next?
Sure. Vikram, the way I see things is, we've talked about a lot of the challenges and also the opportunities, as CKR mentioned. But if I look at the world today, I think there are there are many things, but perhaps I'd like to highlight three things. Of course, the extreme volatility and uncertainty. I think gone are the days when, I suppose every CEO at every era said that, we're having a challenging time. But I think gone are the days of the 3 martini lunches. You can't do that. So it's extreme volatility in commodity prices, inflation, geopolitics, etc. Even if you're a domestic business, it's bound to have an effect. So that, navigating that and trying to make sense of that is the first point. The second point, I think, which sometimes we underrate, is because of technology and the complexity of today's world, the need to have a very differently skilled or a differently thinking workforce. Now, whether it's managerial or whether it is at lower levels, I think that is one point which many of us in organizations underrate. I'll give you an example. When we think, we are largely a manufacturing outfit, right? So when we start thinking in terms of people at our plants and factories, we say, okay, we need engineers, and who are these engineers? They're going to be mechanical engineers, instrument engineers, electronic engineers. But today, I think maybe we need to think like this. Machines are all highly automated, churning out huge amounts of data. So we really are talking in terms of saying we need people who understand data, can make sense of it, run these machines. So it's really software people we want to look at, which are connected to hardware and not the other way around, if you see what I mean. So there's a very different paradigm in terms of skills. And the third, which is inescapable, is the whole realization amongst all of us, as well as in society globally, about this entire climate change and sustainability matter. So whatever we do in business has to be aligned to that. So there are many, many things, but I would stop at saying that these is the way I look at maybe the 3 big imperatives for me as a CEO.
Okay, those are some very valid points. If I can get you, Rajive, to come in with your opening comments on how you see the landscape ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Vikram, and good morning to everyone from my side. What's been happening is change is always there. It's been constant over centuries. But what's happening now is that the pace of change is accelerating with each passing decade or even year. And I mean, if we see the scenario today, it's really rapid. I mean, whether it's disruption, whether it's pandemics, any way you look at, and this impacts corporates, but before corporates, it impacts geopolitically, because very often geopolitical issues, more often than not, the geopolitical issues result in corporate challenges. And if one looks at, say, just the last 10, 11 years, I mean, 11 years ago, who would have thought that Brexit is going to happen? And that's brought a huge sea change in corporates working, say, in the UK. And indeed Europe, because, you know, they were both kind of interdependent on each other to some extent. Who thought 8 years ago that Trump is going to come into power from nowhere and actually bring in a different type of politics and leadership for USA, which impacted the world? Who would have thought 5 years ago that drones will change the shape of war, and a small thing like a drone is going to, in a way, impact the mighty Russia? Whoever thought that? Nearer home, I mean, everybody has touched upon the COVID pandemic, but 4 years ago, other than a very nice movie which was made, nobody really thought of a pandemic on the lines of the Spanish flu, which is today 105 years ago. And based on that, 3 years ago, nobody thought that a vaccine could be rolled out so fast. Closer home, nobody thought that India would produce 4 billion vaccines, out of which 2.3 billion has already been given to people, and both sides of the divide. In fact, it was done so nicely that the people who were really challenged and the poor almost got same benefits as the so-called upper class and middle class. So, you know, I think nobody would have thought that Russia has to withdraw from areas today. Nobody would have thought that. I mean, it was, they knew that Russia was wanting to expand. So, you know, the pace of change is really increased, and perhaps during the course of discussions, we can touch on the corporate side also.
I think those points are all very relevant, and the fact that you could not think of a lot of what is happening today 3-4 years ago is actually the exact reason why we need sessions like this, to look ahead a little bit. Because and I want to get all of your sense on this, for business to be really successful, I think with the pace of change accelerating, you've got to have the ability to try and forecast. Even though if the future is cloudy, you've got to try and forecast what will happen. Because to extend your examples, nobody in the hotel business would have thought 5, 7, 8 years ago that suddenly people are going to be happy just going and staying in random strangers' houses. But that happened. Nobody in the taxi business would have thought that people will just flag a taxi down on the road and, you know, get into it. Nobody in retail would have thought that people will just sit at home and order. So for businesses, if you can't forecast what might be happening, and a lot of this will be technologically led, you will have struggles. If I could just, before we come to some of this, you know, the forecasting part of it, just like to get your sense of, let's just finish with the challenges before we get on to the better part. If you had to, and I'll sort of go in this direction this time, Mr. Neotia, if you had to look at the environment right now, and there is a sense of gloom in many places because of, oh my God, inflation, oh my God, is a recession coming, interest rates are going up, there's a war, you know, oil prices. What would be the 1, 2, 3 areas which you would put as your biggest areas of worry? Policy uncertainty. What would you think are your biggest concerns?
Well, every time I think human beings have been faced with a challenge, we need to, instead of focusing outside, we need to focus inside. We need to go deep within ourselves and try to be a little more intuitive and introspective rather than to be consumed with the storm that is brewing just around. Because essentially, what are we? The human race has survived so many challenges, and it's only because of the inherent resilience of the belief that we have a tomorrow and that tomorrow can be made pleasant. And we have to look for those things that possibly people need and want and find a way to address them. Just take, for instance, I'm just using a simple example. We had a typewriter which helped you write letters legibly. It's gone out of service. I mean, it's probably obsolete today. But the particular requirement of still typing out a letter hasn't stopped. It has moved to a computer and you use a keyboard. So I think once we go deep and try to understand, like people will want experiences. They would like to go out with families and spend quality time. Hospitality is here to stay, except that it may go through a challenge because human-to-human contact has become difficult to do in a pandemic situation. So when you can go deep in and you realize the inherent need for certain things, you will have to probably wait out the storm and then recraft your strategy in such a way that you can actually serve that need in a better way. So I think storms will come, storms will go. The human resilience has always been triumphant, and I so believe it will be in the future too.
There will be human resilience. Of course, there are some challenges and some storms like climate change, which you then start worrying whether they are existential threats. But, I mean, the follow-up to that may well also be that at times of challenge, sometimes there's a tendency to withdraw into your shell, to say there's a lot of uncertainty, these are scary times, let's not invest, let's not be ambitious, let's not borrow money, let's not have ambitious plans, let the dust settle, and then we will try and take, bigger bets. Is that what you're seeing in industry, or are you seeing the opposite?
I think the major problem, from my perspective, if you look at what I see is the inflation is shooting up, or the kind of this thing, the war is happening. Because of that, the oil price, everything is going up. Again, it boils down to inflation and so on. If it is common for my competition also, for entire this thing, if policy is an impediment, if it is common for my competition also, I am not worried about that. So what is most worrying for me is the kind of how the rapid technological evolution, and if I don't catch up, I'll become extinct. If I don't make my people relevant all the time, then it is going to be a big problem for me. I think I don't want a slight edge to be taken over by my competition. And that's a very, very important thing. All the time, how do I take a slight edge over my competition, but I am not left behind? This is how I see all the time. Whether it is technology or any other area, is even acquiring an adjacent profit pools, then if their profitability is going to be far more higher than me and they are going to throw more money, the kind of the thing in the game, then you need to be far more looking at that. How do I defend such kind of this thing, ammunition? While continue to look at what are the kind of opportunities that emerge, what are the new consumer needs based on the kind of rapid change that's happening. I think we need to continuously carve out new strategies and keep ourselves abreast of all the changes, our team. Or when I say that, it's not me alone, my entire team is what I would say. Because at the end of the day, the competition is the talent war. It's not money war. It's eventually a talent war.
Okay, worry about the talent war. I think that's one possibility. Looking at the top 4 or 5 challenges, which ones how would you rank them?
Vikram, I'd already sort of mentioned in my opening remarks some of those challenges, but I think clearly issues currently around, it all comes back to uncertainty in many ways, but issues around inflation, interest rates, policy measures and responses on a global scale. Because even if you're operating in India, you're not unaffected by what happens globally. So those would remain as number one. At the same time, like you asked just now that, given these uncertainties, are you going to go out and do something or are you going to be a bit more conservative? I think it also depends on the business you are in or the business cycle you are in. But there is a tendency to be conservative if you are already somewhat stretched. But if you are okay on a financial standpoint, this is also an opportunity to be able to make certain bets. So I think we are also going to see situations where certain businesses will get bigger. That is inevitable. That's an inevitable part of becoming a growing economy. But at the same time, in a country like India, which is something which is relatively new, is this whole ecosystem of startups. And because of technology, the ability for small businesses to really grow, taking into account ideas that are basically sound, is the great opportunity.
All right, and encourage startups and allow that to proceed. Your thoughts on sort of navigating some of this, and if you had to again look at the specific challenges, how do you think this is going to be poised in the investment cycle? Are you seeing the ability to say, I'm going to be treating this as an opportunity more than anything else and invest more? Or would people wait to see where the dust settles on areas around the global situation,
Well,
inflation?
it depends on which business you're in.
Yeah.
I'll give you two examples as we go through on the corporate side where I have personal experience. But, I think the situation is in the old days, very often when we did scenario planning in the old conventional ways, we thought of, what is the crisis going to be, and we used to try and find out what is the crisis and what sort of actions we need to take. But today is a day where I think all of us who are sort of in a position of leadership in the corporate world, and it's the same politically, you need to think of multiple crises happening at the same time, right? I mean, say when the pandemic came, it was just one crisis which led to other crises. When the wars come, there was the crisis of the war which led to the crisis of the oil and gas price hike, which has varying impacts depending on which part of the world you're in. And it's led to inflation globally. Absolutely. So you're dealing with three challenges or four challenges. In the pandemic, what happened? You couldn't get supplies. I mean, even if you had an automated plant, when you don't get supplies because of the logistics have broken down, your robots can't even produce, even though you may have no people in the plant. So the scenario planning today is got to be done on how one crisis impacts other aspects or all other aspects of your operations. And in a way, AIMA has, I think you're aware of that, Vikram, because you've been there. In Horasis, we have one of our partners, Horasis. And this was maybe about 7, 8 years ago in Cascais in Portugal. There's a brilliant guy called Nicco, who's very much in your line. He was with BBC many years, then he went to Channel 4, ITN, etc. Today he's a visiting professor at King's College and doing a lot of research. He brought out a book on thinking the unthinkable. And what he had said and predicted through his research is happening on multiple fronts. And it's really fascinating. I don't know if you've had a chance to read that book or see his articles, but it's really very much the topic of today. Very much the topic of today.
Absolutely, and I know Nick well, and he's very good at thinking, of what the future is. And I'm going to move in just a few minutes to actually trying to look at crystal balls and see what's actually coming. Just want to quickly turn to policy, and maybe if I can start with you. We're hearing the government frequently, the finance minister and others, looking at industry and saying, we've done whatever you needed us to do from the point of view of reforms and other things. You need to invest a lot more. To which the answer is that yes, but there are still certain issues that you need to sort out, policy stability and don't have harassment or whatever it is. What is it that you think the government can do, and what is it really that industry is asking the government to do to ease the entire, to get the animal spirits back in a sense?
So I would say the policy, we have come a long way compared to where we used to be, kind of this thing, and we continue to improve. But one thing, if the government can continue to focus, they are already focusing, and not only the center, but also the states also, to ensure ease of doing business on all fronts. If we get into a world ranking below 10, I think that itself will sort out quite a lot of issues, is my viewpoint. So that's one important benchmark. There are a lot of policy impediments, kind of this thing, you get into a tangle. All these things I think, can wane away if we just focus on that particular parameter.
Mr. Neotia, focus on ease of doing business is one thing, and specifically within that, I mean, there seems to be recently a new area where reforms seem to be talked about are coming, like decriminalization, taking that as a part of reducing compliances, reducing burdens, reducing regulatory cholesterol, stuff like that. Is that one of the areas that you think the most urgent pending reforms are? Judicial reforms?
Yes, absolutely. I think there is definitely regulatory cholesterol in the system which needs to be addressed. I also think that what we were talking a little while earlier is to have some kind of a limitation, a time limitation, when things can be opened up, like we have in the income tax department. There are various other areas where it seems that you can go back to many decades, which probably is not possible to always answer with the information available. So I think that is very important. I think it's also very important to see how we have time-bound clearances, particularly when you have to take multiple approvals at multiple places. Often they are just stuck for really no reason, and there is no adverse reaction on the system for the delay. So can there be a process of having a time-bound clearance, and if there is a delay, then that has to be with substantive reason.
I think those are two really good suggestions that were made out there. Just your sense on that before I come to the others. What I think Mr. Neotia is saying about limitations is that you should not be able to just open up, or you should have a time period, right? 6 years or 7 years or 8 years, after which you don't come after businesses for XYZ stuff. Is that a very important pending reform, which I think could be done?
Most important thing, I would say, if you say mother of all, is definitely, you can't go behind and harass a person beyond a particular years. Everywhere, any law need to have a limitation of period before you can go in. I think that's what we discussed some time ago. I completely endorse that.
Right. Any other reforms that you would have? So those are two. One is clear, because if any of the government's listening to this, they're saying, what do you want to do? So we've got two, I think, very strong ideas there. Mr. Kaul, why don't I come with you to you before Mr. Singhania? So one is that you should have a period of limitations, after which you cannot rake up old matters, like you have in income tax now increasingly. Second is have a very simple period of clearances, which should be there. Would you agree with those, and would you add anything else?
Yeah, I think the rollback period should be actually, they should not have rollback periods at all. I mean, why a 7-year limitation or anything? I mean, there should be a limitation. If you want to make life simple, income tax, which is 7 years, should not be 7 years where you can open the file. Why should it be 7 years? Today, you're in an age of digitization. Everything is computerized, right? Computers can start flagging red. Now, I'm not talking of criminal, that's a separate thing. Criminals, even today, there is no time limit, and that can remain. But when it comes to sort of the civil side, you must have very, very short time. That will help ease of business phenomenally. But other than the ease of business, I think the pandemic has taught us many, many lessons. Harsh talked about one. I mean, both of us have certain areas in entertainment. He has in entertainment and hospitality. And we've learnt many lessons. You know, I mean, one is a very simple lesson that don't keep any fat at any point of time. And today, if many corporates across the world are doing much better, it's because they were forced to cut out the fat, literally, and really become slim. That's helped a lot. On the hospitality side, both of us have something similar to a theme park. We had zero income. I mean, when you have zero income, it's a real challenge, and you have to carry. You cannot just ask everybody to go home. You have to have a humane touch. So what sort of planning do you do? How do you carry people? So in our experience, we found, as far as the theme park goes, that our biggest expense in that theme parks was salaries and wages. So we said, and in the salaries and wages, the biggest was in the unionized cadre, people, ride operators and things like that. So we willy-nilly got them into confidence. We said the government has announced that we must at least keep paying full salaries. Initially, they didn't give a time limit. Then they said for 2 months. So we said, okay, we'll do that for you. But then, assuming this thing lasts a long time, the lockdowns, etc., what are we going to do? So, they voluntarily agreed because we took them in confidence at an early stage and said, look, we all have to take haircuts. We all have to make sure we are there to survive. I think that itself, for me in that business, the biggest learning was that if you discuss with everybody in an open mind frame, you can come to solutions which are acceptable, even in a difficult, so-called difficult state like West Bengal, where unions have unfortunately a bad name. But they are much better today, let me tell you. And they're good, in fact, today, not just better.
Right. Mr. Singhania?
Mamta Di didn't pay me to say that.
Okay. Mr. Singhania, what he said on the civil side is obviously relevant, but even on the criminal side, and we've heard the Prime Minister repeatedly saying that I want to reduce the cholesterol and decriminalize. There are two ways of doing it. One is going forward by reducing the number of statutes. The other is to do exactly what Mr. Neotia suggested and said, even on the criminal side, if 7 years have passed, 8 years have passed, 9 years have passed, no one can come and say, explain this to me and why did you not paint your toilet 10 years ago and we are going to now, come after you and prosecute you.
If I may, yeah. What they've done is they've converted many civil laws into criminal laws. And that definitely is, I think, what you're referring to, and that's bad. But, where things are not done with a criminal intent. Yeah. And the government, just to make sure that their powers keep increasing, be it the bureaucrats or be it whoever, have been pushing gradually year after year after year, right through the years, and it's not just a recent trend, pushing civil offenses into criminal laws.
Yeah. Is this something that you think worries industry a lot? Because it's an open-ended question then, right? And sometimes it's very difficult if someone's asking you to explain something 8 years ago, 9 years ago, even on the income tax side, you don't keep the record. So that is something which you keep on hearing from industry is one of the biggest stress points, in addition to regulatory flip-flops.
No, absolutely. I think that is this whole point about increasingly civil liabilities turning into criminal is clearly a worrying point. And these things may seem softer, but at the end of the day, they inhibit your ability to take decisions. And we have seen, I don't have to name them, we've seen several well-publicized cases, including of public servants who took decisions at certain points in time and then they were hauled up over the coals decades later. Now, every decision that you take at a point in time, by and large, if your intent is correct, is a good decision. Because a decision taken, whether it's a yes, even a no, is better than procrastinating and not taking a decision. Now, time and circumstance may prove things to be different. That's a completely different matter. But at the end of the day, you can't be questioned on that with hindsight. So that's very important, Vikram. I think the other side is that, CKR talked about the EODB, the ease of doing business, but I think there's also the CODB, the cost of doing business. And all of this adds to the cost of doing business, if you look at it this way. Yeah. The other area I'd like to quickly touch upon is while the government has been pretty steadily trying to do away with obsolete laws, bring in reforms, deregulate, and do a lot of things, there are two inherent issues. One is we are seeing, however, certain regulators getting to be, I don't want to use the word powerful, but really getting into a lot of what I would call from a business point of view, interference, and without leading to productive results. So you keep on explaining. Today you look at compliance. While we do away with certain laws, particularly for listed companies and a whole lot of others, the amount of time that is spent by management on compliance issues is increasing, not decreasing. But I think that comes back to one fundamental point. And the point is the word trust. Do we trust each other? Now, obviously, there are going to be people who are going to misuse the system, be it business, be it in civil society, be it anywhere, even cheating in exams, for God's sake. I mean, all that happens. But at the end of the day, do we inherently want to build a society or an environment based on trust? And if we believe that, then I think it is important to do that. Now, certain actions of the government clearly point towards that. You know, self-certification and things. But on the other hand, you are being asked for so many things to give increasing amounts of information. I'm sure you see that in your business, Vikram, as well. So those are areas which we must understand. If we trust implicitly, and for the 2 or 3 or 4% who have done misdemeanors, you don't paint the same brush and start suspecting everybody.
I think that's a really two really valid points which I'd like to get your reaction to. One, the question of trust people to do the right things. And secondly, as he said, even for bureaucrats, in fact, perhaps even more for bureaucrats, because if you've retired and you've been an honest bureaucrat all your life and you've retired and you have no way to defend yourself, you may not be able to pay for lawyers. And then somebody is coming and telling you 15 years ago you took this decision. Why did you take this decision? It is a bad decision, probably an act of corruption. Now we're going to hold you up. Why will bureaucrats take decisions? Is I think the point that Mr. Singhania is making, and correctly so.
Yeah, before that I would like to add one more dimension, which is again under the umbrella of ease of doing business. You know that we have reformed our laws, quite this thing and all. But one thing that's still not happening in our country is waiting for judgments. Yeah. Okay. The court proceedings or even within the department, it takes so many years. Even some sales tax or GST or even kind of this thing, you have to fight uncertainty for kind of this thing, and you don't know whether it will end up in 5 years, 10 years or 15 years. I think that's a very important thing, that if that is also reformed, you get to know within a year or two, it's yes or right, whatever direction you can take. And that would be nice. Even at one level, then to go to multiple escalation levels, everywhere 4 years, 5 years, then it's 20, 30 years, it goes on. So that's I think, be it criminal or civil, everywhere that's one, this thing is what I would say. So I would very much agree with Harsh that trust is a very important thing. The government should come forward to do it more and more. They are doing it, but they can do still more and keep it far more this thing in terms of, that would help and facilitate a much better business environment is my viewpoint.
Right.
Your
point about a bureaucrat being hauled up many years after retirement, it is true that it has set some people thinking about taking decision. I'll give you a very silly example. In one particular case, I happen to know the bureaucrat personally, and there was a routine approval that I was seeking, and I went to meet him. And he saw the papers and he said that, yes, you deposit them and they should be fine. So I said, sir, can I get the letter expeditiously? He said, hang on. Expeditiously means what? I said, if it's fine, if you can kindly. So he said, no. We will send you a letter asking for some queries. Then when you reply to the queries, we'll send you a second letter asking for some more queries. And then when you reply to that, After that, we will wait for 30 days and then I'll give you the approval, which will all take, say, 60 days. I said, but if it is open and shut, why? He says, you mean later on somebody will say, what was your great need to hurry this up? So now this is something, because I happen to know the guy, he told me the story, otherwise I would have never known, that you'll go through this process just to see that you took reasonable time, you applied your mind, you did whatever you have to do on a matter that didn't require any such thing at all. It was very routine, very simple, not at all requiring this. But even though he was known to me personally, he explained the reason and he said, listen boss, this is how it will happen.
Wow. And you can understand that concern, right? Because otherwise, if you're expediting it, then the assumption is, bhai kuch liya hoga. And we know that in business, you take decisions that are right and you take decisions that are wrong. But unlike the bureaucracy, if you go on looking at every decision retrospectively 5 or 7 or 8 years ago, virtually everybody in business would have been indicted for 1 or 2 really bad decisions that they took. Would you agree with that?
But Vikram, I want to touch on one other thing that you made a brief mention about. And I think you were alluding to, or we talked about, the judiciary side of it.
Yes.
I think part of our problem has been that enormous amount of time or inordinate amount of time it takes to come to certain judicial decisions. And you have a whole bunch of other things along with that, under trials, etc., people being in jail for, without, the matter even coming up for hearing. But the real issue here, as I talk to people in the judicial fraternity, they say that we need far more number of benches. We need those benches to be filled. So we just need, simply to put it, we need much more capacity. And on commercial matters, I think there has to be a little bit of training and orientation of commercial benches, if I may say, to think from a business or a commercial standpoint rather than just looking at it in the letter of the law. So those are the 2 things I wanted to add on the judicial front.
Can I make a point, Vikram? See, I think what's happening is now generally we've moved, all of us, into a sense of what's wrong. Let's look at the rights. In your opening remarks, you said, how technology is impacting the world and how India has progressed as a result of technology to a large extent. Today, the sort of accounts that have been opened under Jan Dhan plan, it's incredible how money was transferred. The efficiency of transfer of money, I think someone yesterday said it used to be Rajive Gandhi himself, late Rajive Gandhi said only 25% reaches the desired. Now almost all of it reaches, right? So these things are there. It's happening in the corporate world. Why is India today become the 5th largest economy in the world? Okay, it is because of our youth, it is because of our population, but it is also because of the fact that our population has embraced technology. 600 million people, including many of the young kids, have those smartphones, which today you can get second hand for 2,000 rupees.
So, yeah.
So I think there's been a huge sea change. And I think, you're the moderator, but perhaps we could each give one example of how technology is helping us today, yesterday, and how it's going to help us tomorrow. With your permission.
You want to start with that?
Because absolutely. Yeah. No, absolutely. Say in again our theme park business, what's happening is AI is changing the way theme parks operate globally. And in India today, we are only scratching the surface. So if we don't rapidly go into AR, VR, we will be losing out to someone else who comes in, opens theme parks and does other things where, you don't need to sort of just go on a roller coaster. Today, people in roller coasters overseas are being given those masks where you are here, but you feel as though you're in space, touching the stars.
Right.
You know, things are changing very rapidly, and we are now embracing these ourselves.
So if I could just add sort of the perspective to it before I get everyone else now in on this question of technological change, I think that's exactly why we are at a cusp, right? We have to end some of the things that have been holding us back, many of which are legacies of the past, delayed judicial systems, red tape, harassment, old cases, things. These are all some of the legacy issues that need to be done away with to clear a roadmap for embracing the very rapid technological change that we are seeing. And if you look at certain media, things that have happened, like the digital stack that you referred to, it's groundbreaking, it's path-breaking, and India has leapfrogged many people. So to do that, you need to remove some of the legacy issues and then move really, really fast ahead. Would that be a fair way, in your view, of looking at the things that set the stage to enable technology-led rapid growth in areas where India can then leapfrog? Remove the chains of the past and move fast.
Both the things will have to move parallelly. One side we will move ahead with technology, the other side we hope that some of this baggage that we're carrying of the past will find a new solution. So I don't think we can wait for one to get over to embark on the other. They will both be parallel tracks that we have to pursue together.
All right.
I'm in agreement with the Neotia. Yeah. I think it's very important thing is we need to do both parallelly going together, but technology with a slight edge. I would give a higher thrust on technology because that will definitely help us to create more jobs and because our technological revolution is serving most of the world population. And more we do that, it will also be nice. And also we need to use more internal for our own use. I think that I would very much in agreement.
If I could now turn to technological, change and technological transformation more. One of the issues that is happening, yes, we've got some absolutely brilliant startups there. And I think India is becoming a test case. I was referring to the payment stack, which is an experiment that is probably one of the best in the world. And there are other such technologies and stacks that can be built in India and rolled out in India. But for all the talk of, embracing technology, what is your sense? Is industry willing to do it? Because sometimes entrenched businesses, different from a startup. A startup doesn't care. And having come from an old media company, I'm now a startup, so I don't care what I'm disrupting. I'm very happy to disrupt it because I have nothing to lose. For more established companies, is it a bigger challenge?
Of course, it's a bigger challenge, Vikram. But look, take your own example. From what you were doing earlier, you must have started, you started with print, and then you went on to television, and now you're Editorji and, doing that completely online. Now, of course, it would have been a challenge for you as well at some point, no, but this is not what I understand, this is not the way, but you did that. Now, therefore, I think there are two or three aspects, but I want to go back to the previous discussion very momentarily. I think what the government is trying to do is deal with some of the challenges which are inherent because of culture, because of the way we have been operating. You call it red tape, call it our mindset, call it whatever it is, and the human system, by leapfrogging or pole vaulting that using technology. So the example, for example, is the instance of the income tax, online income tax assessments and forms and the faceless kind of thing. It has its own dimension when you talk of larger cases, but for the majority of the people, if I look at our company, the majority of employees as individual taxpayers are much happier. As a corporate, as somebody who might have a larger income and you have scrutiny cases, that's a slightly different matter. But for majority of these things, and the same thing happened with the Jan Dhan thing and the cashless transfer that we have, the ability today for a chaiwala or your domestic to be able to transfer money to his or her home is immense, which was just not there yesterday. And also all of this does is it brings in so much more formalization of the economy, because that is one of the other sort of ills that we grappled with in India. How do we bring more? And if you bring more formalization of the economy, you can afford lower taxes and you can have higher government revenue. So there are a huge bunch of benefits that technology is bringing already in terms of government social policy. Now, the question you asked me about technology, but I think, Vikram, the issue is, yes, it is slightly harder for established companies to do that, but I think they have no choice, and everybody has realized that. If they had not embraced technology, businesses would not have been running in the pandemic. Go beyond that. Now, eyes have opened up, and we said, wait a minute. If business was running without anybody coming to office for almost a year and a half or two, how do we reorient our entire organizational architecture that we are able to take the benefits of lower costs and at the same time don't lose on efficiency on that front? Our own companies, I know that across various companies, we have very major multi-year projects going which are using digitization or digitalization, I should say, and technology to completely reorient the way we do business. We'll still sell tires or paper or cement, but how we connect with the customers, how we do it, the way we take information about our processes, our manufacturing processes, how do we make it end-to-end seamless in terms of from vendor management to payments, how our entire banking system works, each and every aspect of it. And this is ongoing. Because if we don't, we are either, as CKR said, either we're going to be left behind or we're going to lose on a big opportunity. And the last point I want to make on this, I don't want to make it long, is that if we don't do it, you talked about the startups, I did, they will disrupt you any which way. So you have to do it.
So let me just throw out one of the challenges. If you actually do embrace technology as we should, and you're looking in the future as we should, you were referring to my personal example, let me just draw on that to tell you what the real challenge is. And this is something which I wonder if we can brainstorm a solution for. When I got into the business, everyone was in print. And we said television is going to come and television news is going to disrupt everything. People thought you were crazy. And by the time we started doing television, it was 6 to 7 years before television became more mainstream. In 2000, when we started to say that, okay, television is going to die and digital news are going to come and news and mobiles are going to come, people thought it was a crazy idea, and it really only took off 5 or 6 years from now. Today and for the last 3 or 4 years, when with Editorji, I'm saying, okay, all of this is going to be history. Now we're going to have AI-driven personalized playlists. People still think you're crazy, and it probably won't make sense till maybe 3 years from now before it becomes mainstream. How do you push really advanced ideas? And this is something which I'm not sure India is as good at as some places like Silicon Valley. How are you able to get really crazy ideas out there to disrupt businesses, to disrupt fields? Because if we don't do it, somebody else will do it. The Americans will do it, or the Chinese will do it, and all. And we have the talent to do it.
He just pointed out that, therefore, AIMA takes a delegation year after year, and you've been on one.
I've been on many of them, and that's why I'm saying this. So you can see crazy ideas there being allowed. How do you replicate that here?
But the good point is that there are so many stars who are of Indian origin in Silicon Valley, and many of them are coming back and doing different things in India as well. So in a way, the startup culture, why did it begin here? It's probably because, we had thousands and thousands of us going there and understanding that culture and bringing it back. So,
but that's what, in a sense, I'm trying to question, because ideally, you don't want to have AIMA delegations going to Silicon Valley and saying, here are really bright, talented Indians who had fantastic ideas, and they went to Silicon Valley and they made the company successful. Ideally, you want to get delegations from America and China and the UK to come to India to say, look what these people have done, and it's path-breaking and it's changing the world.
They are doing it through money, incidentally. But
yeah, they're doing it indirectly, and in certain areas, people are starting to accept it. Like the payment stack, people are accepting. India has leapfrogged everyone else.
But that's also happening, Vikram. People are coming from other parts of the world, coming in an organized way, coming and studying what kind of new disruption that's happening in India. It's very much happening. But I think it's equally, having said that, I think we go and learn also. It's mutually, I would say. Some delegations have gone to China, some have gone to US, the Silicon Valley. I think this is happening for the last 5-6 years is my viewpoint. I have been part of both delegations coming to India, and I had the experience of that, and going to US and China also.
No, so looking at the compass from the point of view of people maybe watching this, who think they can find technological or other solutions for all the challenges that we have, how do they do it?
Well, if I just look at the startup ecosystem in India, which has been recent, very nascent, I would say 3-4 years maybe, and the fact that we have more than 100 unicorns, which are now of Indian origin, is definitely an extremely interesting harbinger of the times to come. So if this can happen in this very short period, we were a Johnny-come-lately, we started much later than Silicon Valley did, but I think the ability for us to catch up and perhaps even upscale ourselves beyond some of the other countries is not very difficult now that we have already set that thing in motion. So I think it will happen. I think we are in a world which is so interconnected that really to say this is Indian and this is international and this is that is gradually going to get blurred, because all these things are going to move seamlessly, and technology has completely disregarded passports, visas, every border conceivable. So, you know, it just flows through. I mean, there's no way to stop it. So I think it will happen. It will happen in our country very soon.
Okay, so I think we're nearly at the end of the session. I'm just going to get a one-word answer from each of you. This is about having a compass and looking into the future. When you look at the future 5 years from now, would you be optimistic or pessimistic on balance?
Well, 5 years from now, I'm very confident that India will have overtaken the German economy, and we'd be very, very close to the Japanese economy. And that will be substantively as a result of our embracing technology, both geopolitically and corporate-wise.
All right. 5 years, optimistic or pessimistic on balance?
Bloody optimistic is what I would say, and pardon my French for that. For the reasons that he mentioned. I mean, India is unstoppable. It's the perfect storm. Maybe I'm exaggerating a point, but really the whole intersection of people, human resources, the technology, and the desire, I think, at the policy making level, the grand plans, I think they fit in well. It's the execution piece that if we can do better, we can do it faster.
All right, bloody optimistic. That's the way to sum that up.
I think I would agree with Harsh. I'm extremely optimistic about India's growth story, and we have a lot of challenges are there, but I think we'll overcome all these things and we'll emerge as very, very strong power to reckon with.
Well, I would like to see, and I think it will happen, that our democracy, which has been seen as often very noisy and chaotic, will itself be the single biggest asset in the next 5 years. Our democracy will prove to the world that through a dialogue, through process of all kinds of challenges, we will emerge to become a resilient and sustainable economy, unlike our very big neighbor, where we often hear immense amount of economic success, but often not so sure about the transparency. We talk about its opaqueness, etc. So I think India will show the way to the world how a very large democracy can actually be successful and functioning.
All right, how a large democracy can be successful and functioning. If I can sort of sum up what I think everyone was saying out here, golden bird, poised to fly, ready to fly, probably will fly. Yes, a few chains which are still holding it down need to be cut and severed, then enable it to fly faster. So Balaji, let me toss it over to you.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's a privilege for me to draw the curtain down on a very exciting and important discussion. I would truly call it a masterclass from Mr. Neotia, Mr. Singhania, Mr. Ranganathan and Mr. Kaul. I think we've been fabulously enriched by their fascinating experiences on this panel, their unique experiences and perspectives on navigating the unknown. The session itself has yielded a lot of learnings for all of us. So a big thank you to all of you. And I must say, Vikram, thank you for moderating this session. Such great stalwarts, and the way you did it was fabulous because you got a certain gravitas to the discussion, and your observations and questions and pivoting, if I might say, which you've done in your professional life was fabulous. So thank you very much for that. I think, ladies and gentlemen, each one of us would have drawn our own takeaways. I learned a lot from this session. I think what our business leaders here were telling us that all of us need to be less worried about adversity. I think that's a big message. Remember, there's going to be uncertainty. What they say is what you don't see will scare you a lot more than what you see because you can assess what's going on. I think that was a big message that came from them. They talked about many, many unexpected events, starting from the pandemic. Then there was a talk about domino effect of lockdown, supply chain disruption, demand and revenue disappearance. They talked about shifting, sweeping shift to digital. They spoke about logistic logjam, inflation, now, of course, the geopolitical shattering of a global economic order. And I think they also said that in all of this, there have been some surprise windfalls for some, but for many, they've been scarred by frequent shocks. And clearly what was the big message from all of them is none of us could have claimed that we knew what was coming our way. I think that was a very, very big observation, but something that they spoke all about. A few things that they also advised us as leaders to be aware of to respond. One, technology is just not an enabler, but a strategic tool, right? Whether it's AI, whether it's about embracing technology stacks or platforms. That's something that they talked about. Second, they said data now stares us in the face, but as leaders, you have to take judgment calls and go beyond emotions. I think that was a very big message that they gave us. Third, there was a lot of talk about social dimension of the disruption. There are privileged few and there are the less privileged ones, and that these social tensions need to be looked at and embraced in terms of what is it that we can do as corporates to be doing the right thing for the larger society and not just our companies. I think that was something that was spoken about. The focus on inside, assess what's going around you, but then look inward because that's what will give you resilience and that's what will give you strength to stay ahead. And stop worrying about, and start to worry a little bit about your current talent pool and how to upskill them and also look at where the future talent pool can come from. They talked about nimbleness and about making sure about thinking the unthinkable. Rajive spoke about that. A lot of discussion on stakeholder engagement and building trust. They said that is very important, whether it's with employees, whether it's unions, whether it's government, to make sure that the ease of doing business happens and so on. So I think these were just my few takeaways. There are a lot more that was said by these leaders, and I'm sure each one of you have your own checklist, if I may, that you would take to your leadership journeys ahead. But before we end this session, I would just request AIMA to present mementos to the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. May I request Mr. Ranganathan to present the mementos to the esteemed speakers, please.